Diabetes affects the eyes significantly. Not only does diabetes increase the risk for things like cataracts, diabetes affects the blood vessels throughout your body. And the retina in the back of the eye is one of the most highly vascular organs in your body too, next to the kidneys and the brain. But we can look inside the eye and we can actively tell if you're bleeding. And that can obviously cause deterioration in vision, but it helps us communicate to whoever's managing diabetes if it's being well controlled or not. Inside of the eye, there's a lens. And this lens you're born with, it's clear, it's flexible, it's really thin when you're young. And as you get older, this lens actually thickens. It actually grows one extra layer thick basically every year of your life. It's kind of like looking at the rings on a tree if you ever look up images of it. As you continue to age though, and you start getting into your 60s, 70s and above, the same lens starts to oxidize. Kind of the classic example is I'll have an old man come in and I could probably guess that he has cataracts because not only his age, but I look at his socks and he'll have one black sock on and one dark blue sock on. He probably can't tell the difference because there's just too clouding of a lens. I have some friends who are researchers in blue light at universities, and most of them do not recommend blue light glasses to most people, not even their own family.
As an eye doctor, what are the most common mistakes you see your patients making that are having a negative impact on their eyes without them knowing it?
One of the biggest things I think people don't realize that they're not doing is they're not cleaning their eyelids. This is something I think a lot of us we avoid it because we're afraid to get water or soap into our eyes. And it's just not part of our, I think, daily routine to think, oh, I should be cleaning my eyelids. But your skin builds a lot of oils, and some people develop different type of oils and they even change throughout our lifetime, right? You can think of like a kid going through like junior high, they start developing acne. Their oils in their body are changing, and we see that even they continue to change throughout our lifetime. But these oils will build up in our eyelashes, and then bacteria and other microorganisms can flourish there, and they eat off of both the oils, dead skin cells, and they release toxins that cause damage and disruption to the tear film and can irritate the ocular surface. And you may think, oh, that doesn't sound too bad, but on a long enough timeline, that inflammation builds up and causes more problems and even disease down the road. So getting in a habit of just cleaning the eyelids every day is a great way to kind of prevent that and prevent future issues like dry eye disease, as well as more complications if someone needs eye surgery or anything like that.
And when you say clean the eyelids, is this beyond what you do just washing your face at night? And is that the only time you recommend doing it? Is it a multiple time a day type thing or just once a day to keep that clean?
Most people only need it once a day. There is still not like a solid recommendation around like, should it be every day? Should it be twice a day? The general recommendation is to clean the eyelids. Yes, some people could probably just use a damp washcloth and just wipe away some of this, but a lot of people benefit from special detergents. There actually are eyelid-specific shampoos. They're like little foaming cleansers that you can find sometimes at the pharmacy. Eye clinics will sell them. You can get, there's like 30 different brands online. But then there's also these eyelid wipes that are basically made to be more convenient. They kind of look like wet wipes that you'd use after you maybe go to like a barbecue restaurant or something, but they're actually made with special soaps to clean the lashes specifically that are eyelid and eyelash friendly so they don't irritate the eye. Those are also a great resource.
All right, so number one, we have cleaning the eyelids. Let's move into others. What are things that people are doing right now and not even realizing it, but their eyes are suffering because of it?
So one of the biggest ones is probably all of the screen time. And it's so hard to get away from, right? Because our world just revolves around screens. Like, right, the first thing most people do when they wake up in the morning is they look at their phone because they're using their phone as their alarm. And that's usually the last thing they look at as well. And so you wake up, you look at your phone, and then you maybe have something playing while you're showering, getting ready for work. You get into a vehicle now that has, again, a giant console screen on it. And then at work, you're in front of screens all day. And so it's always around you. And unfortunately, when we stare at a screen, there's a couple things going on. First of all, for most of us, we don't blink as often when we're staring at a screen. There's plenty of studies that show this, that our blink rate drops to about 25% of what it normally is in just conversation. And then our blink amplitude, how much our eyelids actually close, reduces. So a lot of times when you're staring at the screen, your eyelid, even though you think you're blinking, your eyelid's probably only coming down just enough to cover your pupil. And so your brain thinks that you blinked all the way, but you really didn't. And so the bottom 1/3 of your eyelid or your eyeball is exposed all of the time. And then that leads for your tear film to evaporate into the air. And again, that contributes to low-grade inflammation on the surface of the eye and can lead to tear film disruption, blurred vision, eye fatigue. That can contribute to what we call computer vision syndrome, which also has problems with like neck strain, people bad posture with their neck, and that can contribute to headaches. In addition to that, just being on screens all day and being indoors, this also has ramifications for people becoming more nearsighted, especially with young kids. Like there's this increasing prevalence of myopia, or what's called the myopia epidemic or myopia pandemic, where people are progressively becoming more and more nearsighted and at faster rates and a greater degree. Here in the United States, children are already around 40%. 40% of kids are nearsighted. And it's expected that in the next decade, it'll probably get up to about 50%. And in some parts of the world, like in East Asia, it's 80 to 90% of the population is already nearsighted. So we know there's many factors that contribute to nearsightedness, but we know that people who spend more time indoors and people who spend more time doing up close work, including spending time on a computer or spending time on a phone, and even reading a book really up close to your face, that's been shown in research to be connected to the development of nearsightedness.
That's where I wanted to go next. How much of the problem there, the nearsightedness, comes from the screen itself and the flicker that are on these screens oftentimes, the brightness, the blue light, versus just looking at something close? Do you have any idea on how much comes from each of those pieces?
So we know that genetics does have a role in susceptibility for myopia. So if parents of a child are both nearsighted, their child has a much higher risk. If one parent is like a very high nearsighted amount, then the risk goes up. But the research has kind of gone back and forth, but somewhere around 30 to maybe 40% of the risk of developing nearsightedness is just genetic. So that means the rest is all lifestyle. And so there have been studies looking at, is it books? Is it computers? Is there something with the screen that makes it worse? And those studies have found that it's not necessarily just the screens, that books and screens have about the same risk factor. So it is more of just doing near work. There is some sort of messaging that occurs when you are focused on a near object, that this messaging of how light is focused in the back of the eye is somehow communicating to the brain, or at least within the eye, that encourages the eyeball to grow longer. And there's a few different theories. We don't entirely understand the exact mechanism, and it may have several different mechanisms involved, but there is signaling molecules such as dopamine and nitric oxide that are involved in it. They're just not 100% sure what the greatest influence is. But we know that kids, again, who spend at least 2 hours a day or 2 hours every day outside can sort of off balance this risk of developing myopia. And that if we can find ways to slow down myopia, then their risk factors for other age-related eye diseases also goes down, because as the eyeball stretches, your risk for certain diseases like glaucoma, macular degeneration, or I should say myopic maculopathy, eye floaters and retinal detachments, all of these diseases, the risk factor goes up and up.
And once we get that physical change in the eye and it begins to stretch and we notice changes in vision, Is any of that reversible?
Generally, no, there's no way to reverse nearsightedness. There are some phenomenon that occurs with aging that can have a play on that, mostly crystalline changes that occur to the lens that's inside of the eye. And this can fluctuate with some eye diseases, like diabetes can cause a fluctuation in the swelling of that lens, and that can also change your glasses prescription. But largely the axial length, because in myopia, the eyeball grows longer. If we measure the axial length, that part influences these disease factors. And there's no way that we've have found to reverse and make the eyeball smaller again.
Okay. Because in my world, from time to time, I come across posts that say different exercises, and doing those over a period of time, you can fix your vision. As far as you know, no truth to those.
No, there's actually quite a few studies that have looked into that, of multiple different types of eye exercises. There is good evidence that some eye conditions, mostly binocular vision issues, can be corrected with forms of what is called vision therapy or orthoptic vision therapy. And we use that for, again, children who maybe have an eye issue where both eyes aren't tracking correctly, or they have a hard time focusing up close. Or if somebody has brain injury, they get in a bad car accident, they have brain, neck, or head injury, then they'll use forms of vision therapy to get the communication between the brain and the eye muscles to improve. And so they can improve the vision that way. There is also some research finding that forms of, we can call them eye exercises, but it's more of brain training. It's actually visual perception enhancement. So this affects like older individuals, where we can do these sort of eye training, brain training exercises that improves someone's ability to detect contrast sensitivity a little bit better. They can detect letters and shapes, identify them a little bit better. And so their visual processing speed can be enhanced. And then they may have at least the perception that their vision has improved, although the refraction or change in need for glasses hasn't changed. There are, I will say, because I know a lot of people, some people may be listening to this, are like, well, I went through one of these programs and I tried eye exercises and I reversed my need for glasses a little bit. The cases where that happens, it's actually not that common, but there's what's called pseudomyopia. And pseudomyopia is where somebody more or less has like a muscle spasm inside of the eye. The muscle that helps control your focusing ability to focus on near things like your phone, people can actually get that almost locked in at a near focus. And so when they look in the distance, because the muscle is still engaged, they see everything as fuzzy. And so they will go to the doctor, and if the doctor is either not paying attention or they're maybe rushed for some reason, it's possible to fool some doctors, but they may be able to give them glasses for pseudomyopia. And so they think they're seeing better, but they just need to learn to relax that muscle. And if they relax that muscle, then basically their eyesight goes back to zero, or it can at least reduce. But the axial length of the eye has not technically changed. So there's a few scenarios where that may help, but in general, usually most eye doctors, if someone comes in with pseudomyopia, we can detect that, and then we may use eye drops, or we may go through some other techniques to help kind of reset that muscle inside the eye so people can don't end up getting misdiagnosed and miscorrected.
For somebody up until this point, if say they've been avoiding getting glasses because they're planning on trying one of these programs we just talked about, or just hoping their eyes get better on their own, there's a fear out there of, when I commit to glasses or contacts, my eyes are going to be reliant on those. Any truth to that?
You know, I get that question all the time, and I think it's a good question. I think it sort of makes sense. I think from just the user experience, if you have kind of slightly blurred vision, Some people are walking around, and it's amazing how many people come into the eye clinic, and I have to stop right away at the beginning, and I'm like, who drove you here? Because their vision is so poor, they technically shouldn't be legal to drive, but they don't realize how bad their vision is. And then we'll prescribe them glasses or contact lenses or something like that. And they will come back. They're like, well, I see great with the glasses, but as soon as I take them off, I can't see well anymore. And so it's not so much that the glasses cause the vision to be worse. It's more of that your mental perception now is comparing this high definition world with the glasses. And then you take them off and it's like, wow, now I can really see the difference between those two things. Because usually our vision progresses and gets worse very slowly to a point where we just get used to it. And then suddenly you have this quick, very large jump between sharp and clear versus not clear. Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Coming back to having objects too close, whether it be a book, a screen, it gets me thinking about a common things parents say to their kids of not sitting too close to the TV. Mm-hmm. So is that the same mechanism there?
Yeah, basically, that is a really I can't even call it like an old wives' tale or anything like that. I actually have a family medicine doctor friend, and she has an old book that she got like in an antique store. It's an old medical book from the 1800s. And I flipped it open one day and I flipped to like, oh, where's the eye section? And I read the section, and they had a section they had a part of it that was about how to avoid basically nearsightedness. And they gave general recommendations of like, don't read with the book super close to your face. Don't read while laying down. Don't read in the dark. They said like, only read with bright light. Don't read even with candlelight. They gave kind of these general recommendations. So it was kind of fascinating to see that. I don't think that being super close to the TV, I don't think there's anything with the TV that's necessarily emitting like radiation or anything that's particularly going to cause damage to the eye. But just being a really close proximity, the closer you hold something, the more engaged the muscles have to be. And you also are perhaps influencing the rate of nearsightedness. That also kind of leads to maybe this question with newer devices if blue light is having an impact on us, right? Jesse, how much do you know? Have you read or heard about blue light? I'd love to know.
Quite a bit. Yeah, it's definitely something I'm aware of. And at night, I do my best to protect against it, assuming that it has a negative impact on sleep. But get into it. Let's talk about blue light as a whole. And if there's any truth to any of the, people wearing different glasses or using different apps to block that.
The eye care industry is known about and has been discussing blue light for quite a long time. I think a lot of people have heard about blue light glasses, especially during like 2020. There's a lot of people obviously indoors, they're at home, they're sitting in front of a screen all day, and people are having a lot of eye strain issues. So they start looking things up, or they get advertisements for various types of blue light blocking glasses online. But the eye care industry has known about blue light and concerns about blue light since like the 80s and 90s. There's really three kind of arguments and components of blue light that we are kind of discussed. One is that, does blue light have the potential to damage our eye or increase our risk for aging eye diseases? Because UV light, sunlight obviously can hurt our skin, to help encourage skin cancer and things like that. And we know that UV light can hurt the surface of the eye, but most of UV light does not penetrate through the cornea of the eye, except for at really young ages. And then the lens inside the eye absorbs a lot of the other UV light that does pass through. So if UV light isn't hitting the retina, why do we see this increased risk for aging eye diseases like cataracts and macular degeneration for people who spend a lot of time outside? Well, the idea is that this higher amount of energy, or HEV light, high energy visible light, which is purple and blue light, does pass through the eye because we can see the colors of blue and purple. And so that means those wavelengths of light are passing all the way through and reaching the retinal tissue. And so that's been under investigation for some time, is does this high energy visible wavelength light cause higher levels of oxidative stress? Does it cause higher levels of inflammation in the retina over time? And does that increase the risk of aging eye diseases? And studies are a little bit all over the place. There are some epidemiological studies that have said, yes, there's higher risk. There's some other ones that say no. And so I wish I had a clear-cut answer, but that we do know that there is some risk that is believed to, it makes reasonable sense to say, hey, especially in high intense blue light, such as sunlight, that may have a higher risk toward aging eye diseases. However, the question comes, does the blue light you get from a screen or from an LED light, if you have a new high energy LED light in your home, because you're right, they sap less energy from the electricity system. So people have kind of gradually turned into LED lights. But LED lights emit a lot more blue light than the incandescent kind of yellow colored lights. Well, they find that these indoor lights, as well as computer screens, the amount of energy that they're emitting of blue light, even though it still is the wavelength of blue light, it's not very powerful. And so we are not seeing the same risk factors for damage to the eye from kind of domestic lights and digital devices. Then there's the other two components of blue light, which is eye strain and sleep cycles. Kind of like you mentioned, like you maybe, what do you do, Jesse, for just being aware in the evening of blue light exposure or your sleep? What are you doing?
I've done different things over the years, but right now I have a certain app on my computer that I'll use. I've had the blue light blocking glasses on and off over the years, currently not using those. I have an app on my phone. I'm cognizant about using incandescent light bulbs when I can versus LED at night. I have a red light beside my bed that when I'm reading in bed, I'm using that. So I'm doing a lot of different things, and that's why this is important for me to figure out what science is showing. I'm making a good effort. When it comes to sleep, you mentioned the 3 different parts, and we'll take time and get into each of those. But since we're in the sleep realm now, anything there about blue light at night negatively impacting sleep?
So they have, there are plenty of studies now looking at blue light and its effect on sleep. And the way blue light can impact sleep is because there's a certain receptor within the retina that they only discovered about 10 years ago. It's called an IPRGC, or intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cell. And this cell in the retina does not send visual information to your brain. So if you only had these cells, you wouldn't have eyesight. But these cells pick up light energy and send the signals to parts of the brain like the superior colliculus. And that helps regulate melatonin production and affecting your sleep cycle. There's also some research finding that it also has a role in our metabolism. It's not fully understood yet, but we do know that has some interesting roles in other parts of our physiology. So what's unique about this cell in the retina is that it does have sensitivity to all wavelengths of light, but it's hypersensitive to blue light, specifically a wavelength of around 460 to, and I've read research kind of give a variant, but it's between 460 and 480 nanometers of light, which is a more higher level of blue light, kind of approaching green almost, or yellow-green. The issue with blue light glasses is that there's really no regulation on them, and there's really no cutoff. They often, as a consumer, how are you going to know that the amount of blue light or the wavelength of blue light in those glasses is being blocked? So thankfully, they have done research finding that glasses that do have more of an amber, like they're not a light yellow color, they're more of a dark amber or almost red colored pair of glasses. Those, they're kind of like a dark orange. Those block way more of the wavelengths that this receptor is sensitive to. And so they have shown that if they have people wear these types of glasses an hour or two before bedtime, that their melatonin production is higher versus people who don't wear them. And so there is some evidence that they can have a benefit. Now, the question is that benefit enough to make a real clinical difference in your sleep patterns? I have not seen that level of research because there's so many other factors that could influence your sleep, right? Did you have caffeine that day? Are you staying up, even though you're got your blue light blocking glasses on that block this specific wavelength? Are you scanning your phone and watching videos and engaging in social media that is stimulating to your brain and keeping you up? Right? There's so many other factors. So I have some friends who are researchers in blue light at universities, and most of them do not recommend blue light glasses to most people, not even their own family. They try to focus on other sleep habits, right? Shutting off devices a few hours before bed, turning lights so that they're not bright white, turning them to yellow. They are blue light apps now on most phones and most digital tablets and even your desktop screens. You can turn on this night mode or blue light mode, and it'll shift everything to be a darker orange color. There are publications that show that can have an effect as well, be positive for the sleep cycle effect. So there's even new computer screens. I have consulted with one or two companies that do this, but they have engineered computer screens themselves to emit less blue light. So yes, it has an effect. Blue light glasses may have a benefit if they block the right amount, but it's still tough to say if it's absolutely recommended.
So given all that, you asked me about my routine.
Yeah.
What do you do to mitigate blue light, if anything?
So one is that in the evenings, I try really hard to get away from screens. It's tough, but I go as far as during the worst of my heyday to kind of break my addiction of digital screens, because I think that for a time in my life, I had been almost addicted to it. I now have an analog clock. I went back and bought one of the old alarm clocks that I had as a kid, and I now leave my phone plugged in away from the bedroom. So when I go into the bedroom and I'm saying, nope, I'm going to relax, I'm stretching or I am reading a book, a paperback book. And that way it pulls me away from the screen. I do have all my devices set to turn into a yellow mode in the evening. And then I do my own kind of thing. Either I drink either some sort of sleepy tea or chamomile or some sort of herbal tea, or I will drink there's a dry eye drink that has a PM version that has a little bit of melatonin and then a little bit of valerian root in it. And I've been using that for a few months, and it's great. I actually really like the product. I have no investment in that company, but I've been enjoying that product right now. So that's kind of where I'm at with my sleep regimen. I try really hard to get somewhere between 7-8 hours of sleep at night. I just notice my performance and everything I do is amplified. I feel so much better. I'm way more social and engaged, and my creative energy for making YouTube videos or showing up for my patients when I'm in the clinic, I think better. I think faster.
So when it comes to this blue light thing and light in general, there's two different aspects. We've been talking about it from a blocking perspective, but then there's also getting light in the morning in your eyes to help with energy during the day and to help with sleep at night. So talk about what you're aware in that realm, and is that something you practice? So
it is. We do know how light can influence our brain and our mood, right? For quite some time, right? There's lights for people with seasonal affective disorder. And this is, interestingly enough, a similar wavelength of light that we know triggers these same receptors. So I do try to, when I wake up in the morning, I open the blinds in the house. The first thing I do is I want natural sunlight in, which can be a challenge when I spent most of my life living in Minnesota, which is a little bit the northern side of the United States. So dark in the morning when you wake up, and it's dark by like 5 o'clock in the winter. But I try to get sunlight into my eyes. There is just the caveat for people who are going to be going outside and getting natural sunlight into their eyes. Just be aware of UV light index, of whatever the UV index is outside. And usually this is between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. It has like the highest risk, because again, UV light can damage the skin. It can also damage the surface of the eye. And so if you're outside in those peak times, then definitely consider sunglasses, wide brim hat, something like that. Otherwise, I haven't seen really concrete clinical evidence or like meta-analyses trying to look at this specific type of trend or lifestyle, but I think it makes good sense about knowing how this light influences us. And I anecdotally feel so much better and more awake when I am getting movement in the morning and getting outside. It's like wakes me up way faster than just, waking up and trying to drink coffee. What are your thoughts? I don't know if you've spoken with sleep pathologists or have you read any research specifically on that type of a lifestyle?
From my learning, different experts I'm talking to, I try and get out as soon as I can in the morning, just to at least have some exposure of natural light in the eyes. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about looking at the sun. It's important to make the distinction here. It's just getting out and getting that natural light into the eye. And I'm not perfect, but I do the best I can.
Yeah, I love that you did point out the safety of not staring directly into the sun, because that's another issue. Some people, I have a few patients who have done that. They've gone either through a religious practice or maybe they had a spiritual experience where they tried to stare at the sun. However, if you do that, the sun is so powerful, it can burn a hole in the retina in the back of your eye. We call it solar retinopathy. And again, not only have I had a few patients who've had this, but we had that every time there's a solar eclipse around the world, like here in the United States, this last year we had a solar eclipse. And even though we were giving all these warnings to people about not staring at the sun with their naked eye, I was even on CNN talking about it. But we knew that next week, that following few days after that eclipse, the number one Google searches were, why do my eyes hurt? And so it's just important to know that. You don't want to look directly at the sun.
And when it comes to that eclipse and obviously not looking at it, people that did suffer damage, is that reversible?
In many cases, it's not. If it was just a brief moment, then it can be. It can come back a little bit. The few patients I've had that have had this bad episode where they did stare at the sun and there was damage, we can basically do an image in the eye clinic. We have what's called an OCT, or an optical coherence tomographer. It's kind of like getting an ultrasound of the eye, except in really high definition, and we can see the individual layers of the retina, and so we can see that certain layers are missing or gone. In one case, I educated my patient, okay, well, this might be permanent, but I wanted her to start eating basically really healthy, lots of green leafy vegetables, oily fish twice a week based on some research, and we can talk about this. But then I had her start taking some supplements of certain carotenoid supplements. And about 6 to 9 months later, we noticed improvement in her retinal cell layer, and her visual acuity also improved slightly. So it may have just been an anecdotal single case report, but it made us, obviously myself and the patient, very happy that she had signs of improvement.
That's great. And while we're talking about eye damage, it gets me thinking about red light devices. And I actually have 2 different brands in the house. One of them recommends looking into the device. The other provides goggles to cover your eyes, making sure you're not exposing them. So talk about that. How can we have both ends of the spectrum there?
So red light and eyes is quite fascinating. I think it's an area of study that one of the reasons why some devices will say, hey, wear goggles, it really has to do not only with which specific wavelength that device emits, but again, it's all about the power density. And then there's also the distance from the face, distance from the eyeball, and then the time of exposure. There's multiple factors. And I hate to say, but this area of research around the eyes, I know the skin, it's been around for a long time, but around the eyes, we don't fully understand it yet. And the eyes, especially the retina in the back of the eye, is so sensitive and delicate that if you give too much power to it, too much density, you can cause phototoxic or photochemical damage to the retina. Or there could be heat, and you could elevate the temperature inside the eye, and that can cause permanent damage to the retina too. We do know, so just recently here in the United States, we got FDA approval for the Velita light system. This is a red light therapy type device that will become available to eye clinics to specifically treat macular degeneration. And I've been really excited about this technology. It's been available in Europe and some places in Latin America for a few years now. But this device doesn't just emit red light, it actually emits red light, near infrared light, and then some yellow light. And it alternates with your eyes closed for one part of it, and then have your eyes open for another. And it alternates back and forth for about 5 minutes. And you do this about 3 times a week for like 3 weeks, and you repeat it a few times a year. And the major clinical studies found that with this treatment, not only is it slowing down the progression of the disease macular degeneration, but it reverses deposits of this protein deposit that builds up in that condition. But then it can even give eyesight back. It can restore visual acuity for a lot of people with that condition. So it's honestly I think it's pretty profound research. That's with that specific device though, because other devices, because of this FDA approval, are looking into it. Hey, does this other red light device that's being used for like dry eye or skincare, for example, does that also have the same effect? And they're finding it doesn't. Or if it does, it's a very minimal effect. So it really depends on the wavelength. It depends on the power density, and then again, the other factors of like how often, how long is it being used. And I wish I had the exact answer to break all that down with certainty. But again, the research, as I've been digging into it, it just doesn't seem super clear. It seems like we're discovering things that they work, but we don't fully understand all of the extreme parameter changes.
So it sounds like it, but as of now, you're not looking into any red light devices at home or in your clinic other than this one that's been approved.
So for at home, there are several devices that are on the market, but usually they're sold from outside the United States. There's one from Canada. There's another one from Europe that have these companies. Either I've reached out to them or they've reached out to me. And so I have 2 devices here at home. The challenge is that while they are marketed for being beneficial to the eye, there still remains this question, like, do they really have an effect? Because I could be using it and feel like it's helping, but I'm not finding any objective changes to my eyesight. It could just be placebo effect. I'm still kind of myself like questioning, is the power density enough? Is the power density what the manufacturer even says it is? Because there are also some publications that have shown some of these manufacturers, even though they'll claim the power density is one thing, when they do it in third-party testing, they find that it's not. And so I'm being very cautious myself about before I start making any claims or before I start recommending any specific device to my viewers, listeners. I think it's very early on. So at the very least, if you are using a red light device for your skin or for other health benefits, if it recommends wearing eye protection, then I would definitely continue wearing eye protection for now.
You only get one pair of eyes.
That's true. Although we did have the very first eye transplant the other year that was successful, even though successful in the way that the body didn't reject the organ. The recipient of this donor eye, unfortunately, does not have usable vision. But just the fact that they were able to get the eye transplant fully and him not reject it was kind of a medical marvel in a way.
Do you feel like we're getting close to the next step where the eye is actually usable?
The industry is having those conversations. I think there's going to have to be obviously leaps and bounds in medical technology. And as maybe AI ramps up, maybe that'll come with it. But really connecting the eyeball itself, especially the retina and the nerve of where the retina sends all of the information through the nerve of the eye, it's all neural tissue that connects to the brain. So it's basically like doing a brain transplant, like a really mini brain transplant. You can only imagine how complex that is. Try to, like if you're trying to like hotwire a car or something like that, which I've never done, but in the movies, they always show people like they have to touch wires together, right? Imagine having over 1.5 million individual wires that somehow the doctor would have to connect every single one in the right ones to the right, the donor eye to the brain tissue, and it would just be so complex. So with some luck, we'll figure it out eventually.
With this one case where the new eye took but didn't work, was their intent when they put that in, do you know, to provide vision? Or was it just to be a first step to further transplants?
To my knowledge, it was more of just a first step to kind of see if it would be possible. I believe they had success in some animals, but this was the first human eye transplant that was ever deemed a success. But yeah, I imagine they did not promise anything. What is cool is that they have done electrodiagnostic studies and have shown that there is some electrical signals that are being generated, that the eye is picking it up and it is getting sent to the brain, but the recipient cannot see light. He cannot perceive anything with that eye.
As you're sharing that, it gets me thinking about what we were talking about before with blue light and our circadian rhythm. This person that had the eye donated and transplanted, I wonder if there's any connection there to blue light and morning light and affecting the circadian rhythm, even though there's no vision.
Yeah, I have no idea. That's a good question, though. I haven't heard any doctor I've talked to like have that conversation.
Just interesting to think about.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, we know that light is sending different signals to our brain than just vision. So who knows what sort of wires got crossed during that procedure or how his brain is interpreting it, or if the brain has enough plasticity to relearn how to see. That's a whole other concept and discussion in eyesight and visual development. But neuroplasticity is a huge thing for our vision development as kids, and as we get older, usually plasticity slows down, but more research in the last few decades have shown that plasticity doesn't 100% stop. And so there are forms of eye vision therapy as well as what's called amblyopia treatment that can even improve eyesight even into later years of life.
Or even putting stem cells into the mix after the eye is taken in the transplant.
I hope.
And yeah, it's all interesting.
Yeah.
Was this done in the US?
This was done in the US. I don't remember exactly where. I want to say it was on the East Coast, but I could be mistaken.
All right. When we were talking about red light, you mentioned that device approved by the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned macular degeneration. Talk about what that is and how it forms.
Yeah. So macular degeneration is one of the leading causes of permanent vision loss and blindness for people over the age of 50. The challenge with macular degeneration is that it affects the central part of your eyesight. So reading becomes nearly impossible. If you and I were sitting across from the table and I was trying to look directly at your face, I would not see your face or your head. I would still see my peripheral vision, assuming I didn't have any other eye disease, I would still see my periphery. But your like acuity, your ability to read with your peripheral vision is very, very low. And so macular degeneration can be devastating. So you can imagine, I've had patients who are like, oh, we're going to wait till our retirement to go travel around the world. But then they come in and then I have to give them this devastating diagnosis that they have this historically irreversible blinding eye disease. So it has always been one of my deepest fears that crap, I'm going to grow older and I'm going to develop this disease. So we don't understand everything with macular degeneration, but it's where the tissue of the retina degenerates and stops functioning. And the cells with the photoreceptors within the back of the eye, they start to degrade. And we see this buildup of a protein in the back of the eye called drusen, which is more or less cellular garbage, is without any other best way to say it. So the photoreceptors, right, your rods and cones, they are supported by a kind of a scaffolding structure called the retinal pigment epithelium. And this RPE, or retinal pigment epithelium, they supply all of the nutrients to grow the photoreceptors and to fight oxidative stress and inflammation. And every time a photoreceptor gets light energy like photons, it sends this signal to the brain, but then that photoreceptor is used up. So your body has to phagocytize and eat up the garbage, old, used up photoreceptor, and has to generate a new one. And so this drusen is more or less a buildup of all these cell membranes of these dead photoreceptors that the body, when you're young and healthy, is able to basically eat up and get rid of. But in macular degeneration, for some reason, it starts to just accumulate. It's like somebody's throwing the garbage out on the street, but the garbage man's never come to pick it up anymore. So it just builds up and builds up. And so this generally happens to people over the age of 50, and it gets more prominent the older you get, so closer to your late 70s, 80s. There is some genetic factor. So some people have what's called complement factor H. It's part of your body's immune system for fighting inflammation. Just doesn't work correctly. And so we see higher risks of macular degeneration. And there's two types. If somebody was, after hearing this, if they ever talk to their family member or they see an eye doctor and they're told that they have macular degeneration, they'll probably either hear dry macular degeneration or they'll hear wet macular degeneration. Dry macular degeneration is just when the photoreceptors slowly stop working and they kind of decay. Thankfully, dry macular degeneration is most common and it's not as severe. And so it slowly develops over time. Wet macular degeneration is more aggressive. That's where, because there's so much oxidative stress and inflammation inside the eye, the body realizes, hey, I'm not getting enough nutrition or whatever the metabolic whatever's needed for the proper metabolism of the retina is not there. So it releases this signal, this chemical that we call VEGF, vasoendothelial growth factor. And this is basically like a big red flag saying, hey, I need nutrients, send blood vessels here. So your body ends up growing new blood vessels into the eye, which sounds good, but it actually destroys the architecture of the retina, and these new blood vessels will leak. They leak fluid inside the eye, and this fluid can make your vision distorted, extremely blurry, and it happens very quickly. So we call that wet macular degeneration. And right now, the only treatment really have for wet macular degeneration is getting an injection of an anti-cancer medication inside of the eye, which encourages these blood vessels to recede and go away. And unfortunately, that type of medication is also expensive. So not only do people not want to get a shot or a needle in the eye, but they also can cost several hundreds to maybe thousands of dollars for every injection. And people will get these injections every 4 to 6 weeks sometimes.
So the red light device is only for the dry?
So right now it's for dry, which again, for most people, it's more common to get the dry macular degeneration. But I'm just excited because this is like the start, right? We haven't had, outside of this red light device, all we've had to treat macular degeneration is either these injections. Long time ago, they used some forms of laser, but they weren't super effective. And then we have vitamin supplements, because that's, you'll hear some doctors in different fields. Some doctors are very anti-supplement, right? In the field of eye care, we're one field where we have very strong evidence of the benefit of taking certain supplements, specifically for the disease of intermediate dry macular degeneration. And so basically they did these studies. The famous ones are known as the AREDS or AREDS 2 studies. They're age-related eye disease studies. And these are thousands of people that they followed very closely over about 6 to 9 years, depending on the study. And they basically not only saw them for eye exams and followed their eye health, but also they tracked their dietary habits and other lifestyle factors, including supplementation in some branches of the studies, and found that certain lifestyle habits decrease the risk of developing macular degeneration, as well as decreasing more of the progression of the disease. And so they were able to basically make this cocktail of vitamin supplements that could slow down macular degeneration by about 25% over the course of 5 years. So for anybody that's diagnosed with at least an intermediate stage of macular degeneration, of dry macular degeneration, then it's more or less standard of care for the eye doctor to recommend or prescribe these specific eye supplements.
And what are the specific nutrients involved?
Good question. It's changed and evolved a little bit over time because they've done these studies a few times trying to test, hey, can we change the level of zinc, for example? The original formulation had vitamin C, had vitamin A in the form of beta carotene in it. They also had some level of like copper and zinc in there. And the copper was really put in, they put copper in there because when you take supplements of zinc, and I imagine you may know this, but if you're taking zinc supplements, it can reduce your copper absorption from your diet. So they added copper in the form of cupric oxide into it just to help get that back in there. As it's evolved, as the supplements evolved, and now the current one, they had to remove beta carotene because they later found out that people who supplemented with beta carotene, if they had previously smoked, had like almost a 2-fold increased risk of lung cancer. So they got rid of the beta carotene and they put in lutein and zeaxanthin. And those, we can talk more extensively about those because those have not only antioxidant benefits for the eye, but also a anti-inflammatory benefit that can also improve eyesight in some ways, as well as help improve visual memory and cognitive benefits for both adults as well as young kids. But primarily, that's what's in those supplements. They did also study omega-3s a little bit in those studies, and that gets a little bit more nuanced. But we also know omega-3 fatty acids have a huge role with retinal health as well.
So as you got into that, we were springboarding off of macular degeneration. How much of those nutrients are applicable to general eye health, and what ones are specific to that condition?
Again, right now, if you don't have a diagnosis of macular degeneration, most practitioners in eye care probably would recommend taking the specific supplementation that's called AREDS vitamins. There is not very strong evidence that it would help prevent developing macular degeneration. So it's still kind of debated amongst professionals if they recommend it or not. In general, though, things that are good for the eyes, we know that vitamin A is essential for retinal function. Most people in developed countries are not vitamin A deficient, but your body can get that either from beta carotene from eating plant vegetable sources. You can also get it from eating some meat-based sources. Certainly liver is probably the most famous one. You got to be a little cautious though, because it is possible to get too much vitamin A and have hypervitaminosis, which too much vitamin A can also cause problems with the eye. But our body's really good at regulating vitamin A. The vitamin C is also really important for the eye. It's, in fact, one of the most highly concentrated places in your entire body of vitamin C is within your eye. It's about 15 times more concentrated in the eye than it is just in your blood serum plasma. And it's there because the lens inside the eye is avascular. There's no blood vessels getting to the lens. And so your aqueous humor, one of the liquids inside of the eye, needs vitamin C as a strong antioxidant to prevent cataract formation. With that being said, they've also done studies on vitamin C and have found that if somebody's malnourished, then supplementing with vitamin C may help slow down the development of cataracts. But if somebody isn't deficient in vitamin C, adding more to it doesn't have a clinically meaningful benefit to preventing cataracts. But still, vitamin C, beta carotene, or vitamin A, very good for the eyes. Zinc in general is believed to be very good for the eye. There are a few studies that maybe raise a risk factor for some people that zinc could cause macular degeneration specifically to get worse. Largely not accepted as a whole in the industry. Because the company that made those publications also happened to have invested interest in the genetic test to determine if you're susceptible to zinc or not. So I think more research is needed to have a final conclusion on that. But they did reduce the initial ARED studies had 80 milligrams of zinc. And then they said, hey, that's a lot of zinc, especially because a lot of people are taking other forms of multivitamins and things. So they dropped it down. And so somewhere between 15 to up to about like 20 some milligrams of zinc is in a lot of the ARED formulas now. Some are zinc free. You can find those too. Most research though does support that getting your supplements or vitamins and everything, your nutrients from just eating whole foods and eating a diet that's more along a true Mediterranean diet is by far the best at reducing risk for eye diseases and for keeping the eye healthy.
You mentioned there the risk when somebody's taking beta carotene if they're previously a smoker for cancer. Do you know if that is also connected to vitamin A specifically or just beta carotene?
To my knowledge, it's just beta carotene. I can't say I understand the exact mechanism of why that is, but that was based on some larger scaled studies. I believe that was done in Europe. I could be mistaken, but it was kind of fascinating. But ever since then, they still obviously getting beta carotene from natural sources is not a concern, but taking kind of beta carotene isolate, if you'd previously smoked, may increase the risk.
Before we leave macular degeneration, you mentioned their age being a risk factor, but I didn't catch any other risk factors. It sounds like there's some mystery there of who's getting this. For people now that are aware of this disease and how scary it is, anything we can do to mitigate risk?
Yeah, thanks for asking that and kind of clarifying this. So other than, genetics, we can't really control, right? But lifestyle-wise, smoking, number one. And thankfully, the rates amount of people who are smoking is decreased. But smoking is a very strong risk factor. Other components, sunlight exposure. Again, there are studies that link sunlight exposure as being higher. So I still recommend UV light protection. There's still some debate if blue light glasses outside are recommended or not, but at least UV light protection. They find, again, diet, eating a Mediterranean diet, and I like to say ancestral or whole food Mediterranean diet, right? You don't want all this extra kind of mystery chemistry that is in a lot of processed foods. Watching cholesterol or really saturated fat has been higher levels of saturated fat have been linked, have a stronger association with the rate of macular degeneration. Trying to think what else. There's been other studies and research that have connected it, but most things aren't a very strong association. But eating really healthy has been shown to reduce the risk. A study that came out this last year from the American Clinical Journal of Nutrition, they even found that people who ate at least 2.7 servings of green leafy vegetables a week, it's not that much, right? A week, had about a 25% reduced risk of progression in that condition. People who ate oily fish, again, omega-3s play a role in retinal health because the photoreceptors in the retina have about 50 to 60% of them are DHA omega-3. People who ate 2 servings of fish a week have about a 21% reduced risk. But synergistically, if people are eating both green leafy vegetables and oily fish a week, they have about a 41% reduced risk in progression of that disease. So I do encourage people to try to focus on what they are eating, because we know food affects so many health things in the body, and they definitely affect our eyes. So that's another thing I try to encourage people to try to eat healthy. And if they have a hard time, getting green leafy vegetables in their body for either medical conditions, digestive issues, or they choose not to eat green leafy vegetables for some reason, then there are benefits of even taking supplementation of lutein and zeaxanthin on their own. Those are carotenoids that specifically are found in high abundance in green leafy vegetables, but they deposit specifically in the eye and kind of work as either a shield against high energy blue light, but they also have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant capacity within the retina. And that's at least something that you can choose to supplement with.
All right, I want to come back to the blue light piece and close that chapter of our conversation. We mentioned the 3 different aspects: damage, sleep, and eye strain.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked about the strain piece. Bring that in.
So that's probably the other component where people have seen a lot of advertisements from different companies online, or maybe at one point their doctor had mentioned it. The research on blue light and eye strain is not very conclusive. I've really dug pretty heavily into it to try and understand it myself. There are some studies that do show an association, but we really don't have concrete evidence of why. And it's a very kind of just messy subject, right? There's a lot of factors involved with sitting in front of a computer. It could be your posture. It could be your blink rate. It could be that you're focusing on something so close. But there is this idea that maybe blue light or the flickering of the screen may affect your increased risk of eye strain. There are some studies looking at glasses, like blue light glasses, and they've largely concluded that blue light glasses don't help with eye strain. But I also will push against that, saying that those research studies are poorly done. They only use one type of blue light glasses, and you always have to question what wavelength of blue light are they blocking. And they usually do them only for like 2 hours, where most of us are in front of a screen for 13 plus hours a day. I always kind of give the analogy of that's like taking a marathon runner who runs marathons professionally and then saying, hey, I want you to wear these shoes. I want you to run 1 mile. Tell me, do they feel better? It's hard to really make that judgment. So I would say right now, anecdotally, a lot of people in the clinic, patients who come in, they do report that they've either tried blue light glasses and they've helped, or they feel like at least it helps reduce fatigue, or it feels comforting to their eyes that things have this slight little yellow appearance to them. So there's at least the anecdotal component there, but for anybody who really wants to nerd out in the science, you probably won't find very concrete evidence that blue light glasses help much with eye fatigue, other than versus placebo.
You quickly mentioned Flickr there. I know the software I have on my computer here, that's one of the things it addresses. It's called Iris,
Mm-hmm.
and it addresses the blue light piece like we've been talking about, and Flickr. So is that something you're concerned about when it comes to the eyes, something you block?
So Flickr is is a really interesting topic. I can't say that I'm the absolute expert in understanding flicker. I'll have to ask one of my friends and colleagues, who is she's a leading expert in ocular motion and kind of the neurological components of eye movements and flicker. But we do know that, again, computer screens, they're not a solid image, right? For anybody who hasn't dug into how screens work, they're actually constantly flashing. Even LEDs, they're not a solid light that's just being emitted. It's technically flickering at a very fast rate. It's like on, off, but so fast that your brain perceives it as a solid image or a solid light. And so they have found that some flickering rates of lights can affect our neurological system. In fact, do you know how they discovered the epileptic seizure component to flickering lights? You know, at the beginning of like movies and video games, it'll say like, hey, warning, if you have a history of epileptic seizures, this game may have flashing lights, that sort of thing.
I've seen it. I don't know the history.
It was because of fire alarms. When they first invented fire alarms inside of buildings, they would have a flash, right? Have you ever seen the flash? Like it's super slow now. Like modern ones are very flash and they wait a little bit and then you see a flash again. When they first came out, they were so fast that for people who are deaf, because that's why the light's on there, for people who can't hear, the flashing light would tell them that, hey, there's a fire. But for a few people, it would trigger their epileptic seizures. So for some people are more susceptible, whether they have a history of seizures or perhaps they have something else going on. Maybe they have bad head injuries, head, neck, brain injuries, but we can be hypersensitive to flicker rates. And there is at least some theories that either screens or even while we're driving down the road at nighttime, you know, all new headlights are like LEDs now. They seem like they're a steady light, but they're all actually flickering really fast. And while visually we see them as solid lights, is our brain in fact picking up that they're flickering, and is our brain reacting differently to them? So there is some concern there. Have you noticed? I don't know. I've used the Iris program myself in the past, but I don't recall. Can you adjust the flicker rate in any way with that program?
The only thing I know about it is you have to have your brightness on your screen turned to max, and then adjust the brightness on the app itself for the anti-flicker to work. And I don't know anything other than that.
Okay. I
use it, but I haven't noticed a difference specifically.
Okay. I think that there are people who are probably more sensitive to the flicker. In fact, I more or less know some people are. I haven't dug specifically into that research myself, but I have had patients who report hypersensitive to some computer screens, like some screens versus others, like it may be a software difference, a software or hardware difference. So I think it's something we don't fully, at least I don't fully understand yet, but is a really good question. I would love to hear feedback or people's comments. If anybody else listening to this or watching, they're like, I definitely am sensitive to flicker. Let us know. It'd be good to kind of dig into that.
And earlier you mentioned bad science when it came to, I think it might have been the blue light glasses. I think we all have to keep in mind science is one piece of this, but it's not perfect. We don't necessarily have studies, and we often don't, on all these different pieces. There's so many different variables even when we do have science. There's junk science, there's sponsored science. I'm not saying avoid looking at science. It's great, but it's a piece of all this.
100%. Very well said.
I want to come back to something we talked about early on, and this is distance to either a book, a screen, things we're focusing in on. And because in the modern world, there is so much of that going on, whether it be working on a computer, and then maybe even leisurely reading a book at night as your activity after you've been on your computer all day. So given we know this isn't good for our eyes, what can we do to hack that? So say I know I'm going to be working in front of my computer for 8 hours. I know that it's not great for my eyes. Given what you know about the science and your experience in this realm, what would you do? Specific exercises, different things throughout the day to help mitigate that damage?
So I think a lot of viewers, listeners, and let me know, Jesse, have you heard of the 20-20-20 rule before?
I've heard you talk about it.
Yeah. So historically, and this has been around for a good decade or more, we have what doctors will say is the 20-20-20 rule. And that means that every 20 minutes to take a break, to at least look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. Now, the doctor who made that up, it completely made it up. It wasn't really based on any published science. In fact, they did a research study a year or two ago and more or less completely disproved it. And what they found is that 20 seconds, a 20-second break is not long enough. That's what they found out. So it is a few different studies I've read from different disciplines do agree that taking a break from, if you're sitting at a desk in front of a computer, right, a sedentary lifestyle, taking a break every 20 to 25 minutes, somewhere around that, is like ideal. And I try to do that. I have a little dodecagon timer here on my desk that I turn around to every 20 minutes. Or I actually have a program I just downloaded recently that has a timer on it. So I can set it and it'll give me reminders. So taking a break every 20 minutes, just to stand up, get away from your desk, do some stretches, be aware of your posture, and you want to take a break for at least 90 seconds, somewhere around 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Do something different, get movement in, look out to the window. You know, it's not taking a 2-minute break to look at your phone. No, it's take a 2-minute break to get away from the screen, do something else, go get a drink of water, use the restroom, change your brain pattern for just a moment. And not only do they find that is going to help better with your focus, relaxing your eye muscles, but it's going to help you with your productivity even. They're finding productivity improvements with having kind of this disruption. So I think that's one thing we can all try to be a little bit more mindful of.
You give this great analogy of somebody sitting in front of the computer all day being like somebody in the gym holding a weight half curled and trying to keep it there for hours. That's basically what we're doing with our eye muscles and expecting them not to fatigue and cause issues, which ties into what you're just talking about.
Yeah. And you think of it like a light pound weight. If it's like a 1, 2, or a 5 pound weight, like almost anybody can hold that for a long time. But you do it for hours and hours, eventually, yeah, your muscles are going to get tired and fatigued. So I do like that analogy. You got to find a way to relax those muscles and let them go. Beyond just taking frequent breaks, especially if you feel like your eyes are drying out. Again, we don't blink as often on the screen. Reminding yourself to take more frequent breaks. You can use lubricating eye drops. I do encourage people to look for preservative-free eye drops if they can, because the regular preservatives have been found to be quite toxic to the surface of the eye. And then, you know, for people who are really in having more dry eye, but they know that they're like indoors during the winter time, furnaces are on, humidity often drops pretty low, so they could look into having a humidifier in the office too. That's more specific for dry eye, but it can have a benefit.
Well, I know for you specifically, dry eyes has been an issue over the years. And you just mentioned being in the indoors in the winter and looking at screens being issues that could flare that up. But what other things cause that?
So dry eye is really quite complex. For myself, I've been in front of a screen since I was a kid. I played a lot of video games, watched a lot of movies, and read a lot of books. I was very much an indoors kid. But I got contact lenses at age of 13, 14. And they were amazing. They transformed my life. The downside is contact lenses, they help with the evaporation of your tears. So your tears evaporate much faster. And they also may potentially cause micro changes to the neuroanatomy of the cornea, because your body produces more tears based on ambient temperature readings by the nerves in the surface of the eye. And so it's constantly sampling, hey, how warm is the room? And if the temperature in the room changes, even by like 1 or 2 degrees, your eye detects this and will say, I need to make more tears. And So if you're wearing contact lenses, not only do you have this plastic shield covering these nerves, the surface of the eye, but then the mechanical friction of the contact lens on the eye, especially over a long enough timeline, also is known to cause damage to those nerve endings. And so, especially if you're at risk of dry eye, there's always the question if your doctor recommends contact lenses is a good option for you. Some people who with really extreme dry eye may have to drop out of contacts. Other factors that influence dry eye is, I hate to say it, age. We know that as people get older, risk of dry eye goes up. That may be due to hormone changes, as women in premenopause and menopause definitely get dry eye faster and more often than men. Cosmetic use may play a role. Like we talked about at the very beginning, inflammation on the eyelids due to blepharitis or this buildup of skin oils. That's why cleaning the eyelids is so good. That can contribute to dry eye. Even diet and sleep are affected, have been found to be connected to dry eye. It is a multifactorial disease. But we're seeing this increased amount of people with dry eye disease, even in young teenagers. And part of that is because the eyelids have these oil glands in them called meibomian glands. And every time you blink, a little bit of this oil comes out, and this oil mixes with your tears and prevents them from evaporating. However, these oil glands, we're finding younger and younger people are having this dysfunction where these glands are getting clogged and then they're dying off. And there's at least some publications that kind of connect to this hypothesis that the amount of screen use and this lack of blinking that we're doing is leading to these glands not being used, and then these glands are clogging up and atrophying. That's at least the current theory, but it seems plausible.
What about on the other end of the spectrum? Somebody who has wet eyes, their eyes are weeping.
There's a few causes of wet eyes. The medical term is called epiphora. For some cases, if it's sporadically throughout the day, right? You know, when you first wake up, my eyes are wet, they're not dry. Or after I'm on the computer for a few hours, they're more wet. Or I even have some patients where they are retired and they love to read, but they only feel like every time they read, after 5 minutes, their eyes start to water all the time. That type of tearing that's sporadic is likely reflex tearing that's actually caused by dry eye. It's a funny enigma, but your body's really good at detecting dryness. And if you have dryness, your body, like your nerve cells may have become numb to the dryness where you don't think they're dry, but your body detects it's dry and there's damage occurring. So your body makes new tears, a flood of tears, to try and bring moisture back to the surface and heal. So again, if it's sporadic, it could be reflex tearing. For other people, especially if it's like one side, like I had a patient the other week their left eye was watery all day long, every day, and it's been going on for like 2-3 months. And it's just like they have to bring tissues with them everywhere. And now they even have like, it looks like they have sore tissue, like a very soft, irritated skin around the eyes because it's constantly watering. And in cases like that, it was a blocked tear duct. This can get blocked for many different reasons: inflammation, dust of particles or something got stuck in their tear film and it went down the drainage canal by the nose and got clogged. In that case, thankfully, I had her back in. We did what's called a dilation and irrigation procedure, where we just take saline solution and we have a special tool that we put into the drainage canal and just flush it really hard. And I would say 80% of the time for myself, I probably experience that will just flush the blockage downstream and then it's clear. There are some scenarios where it doesn't break down, and then I'll refer for a surgical consult because they can do a procedure where they basically have to surgically clean up the drainage canal.
For somebody at home that's feeling like they have a mild clog of that canal, anything they can try before seeing somebody like you?
It's tough. Generally, no. They could see an eye doctor, and maybe I know some practitioners will prescribe topical steroid eye drops for a short period of time to see if it's an inflammatory cause, if the steroids will calm things down and open things up. I've never found too much success with that strategy. For young kids, it's a different mechanism going on, but like young babies sometimes can be born where their tear duct isn't even open yet. And so they'll encourage, like pediatric surgeons will recommend that parents do like a massage on the eye, on the tear duct here on the nose, right by the eye, to try and encourage the duct to open up. But usually it opens up on its own within the first year of life anyway.
As you're talking about massaging there inside the nose, it gets me thinking about one of your videos where you talk about not massaging the eyeballs.
Yeah.
Talk about why that's something to avoid.
Thanks for asking that. This is something I don't get from too many people, but doctors will recommend this. If you've ever gone to see an eye doctor, sometimes we'll say, hey, don't rub your eyes. Especially we'll tell this to young kids, because some young kids but have bad allergies, or they just have like this bad habit of rubbing their eyes. And it's not just gently rubbing their eyelids. They're like grinding their knuckles into their eyeball. And again, it may feel good to them because they feel like they have allergies or something's irritating their eyes. But there's an increased risk associated with hard rubbing of the eye of an eye disease called keratoconus. This is where the cornea, the front surface of the eye, becomes warped and becomes progressively thin. And as it thins out, the surface of the eye takes the shape of a cone. Again, hence the name, keratoconus. This condition, unfortunately, is progressive. And so it often shows up in like teenage years, but we'll see it slowly progress and get worse and worse over someone's early adulthood. And it can cause their vision to be so blurry and distorted that even glasses can't fully correct it. They usually end up needing specialty custom fit contact lenses, or if it thins enough, it can scar, and then they may even need a corneal transplant. It does tend to run in some families, not always, but we know that rubbing of the eyes is a risk factor. So we always try to encourage anybody who may be at risk of it, whether it runs in families or if somebody's diagnosed with astigmatism, if you've ever heard that term before. If like a young kid has a high risk of astigmatism or they're showing signs of it, we'll often recommend to them to not rub the eyes.
For somebody that gets frequent bags under the eyes, dark circles, what's going on there? So
this is a common question, not only by patients who come into the clinic, but online for sure. Cosmetically, if we look in the mirror in the mornings, the eyelids may look a little puffy, especially if you had a late night. Maybe you had like a cheat day the night before. And I've done that before. I'm like, I'm just having a bad time. I'm just craving like a meat lover's pizza or something. And the next day I just feel kind of gross, from all the salt and all the extra calories and things. And but my face will look kind of puffy and swollen. So there are actually two different things. There are dark circles around the eyes, and some people genetically do have higher pigments on their skin and around the eyes, which can create the appearance of this darker circle, like raccoon type of eyes. But then there's also the swelling of the eyelids, and the swelling of the eyelids can create a shadow effect that also makes the eyes look like they have dark circles. So the first thing, if you ever see an eye doctor for these conditions, they have to look at it from those two perspectives. Like, is this just swollen eyes? Is it hyperpigmentation? Or is it a kind of a mix of both? Swelling of the eyelids can occur for multiple different reasons. The older you get, you have a higher risk of it. And they've done studies that show this. But the swelling of the eyelids usually does resolve on its own within 2 hours after you wake up. An easy thing you can do if you're really worried, like you have to get into work or something, or you're going to take photos, you can get a cold compress. You can, something that is cold, you can, like if you have a swollen knee or a swollen elbow, you can put cold compresses on it. Doing that for 10 to 15 minutes. But I always say be careful, don't go over 15 minutes. If you go over 15 minutes, it can actually cause vasodilation. and make things worse. So cool compress to the eyelids. They sell eye masks, like cooling gel eye masks too. I usually keep one in my freezer just in case. So that can be helpful. There are eye creams for like swelling or eye bags. The creams often have caffeine in them and various other ingredients to constrict the blood vessels, right? If there's fluid there, they want to constrict the blood vessels, reduce the amount of fluid that's coming from the blood vessels to that area. And they work temporarily. So they can have their place, but they're not going to be a magic cure or anything like that. The pigmentation that people can have, there are also creams that help with hyperpigmentation, but they often take multiple weeks before you notice a benefit. I've seen some publications showing it takes at least somewhere between 12 sometimes up to even greater, like 16 weeks of treatment with those types of eye creams to decrease the amount of pigmentation around the eyelids. So those are a couple of methods. As people get much older, like if you're 40, 50 and above, if you feel like your eyelids are chronically puffy, like not just in the morning, but all day long, and it's not just due to like salt retention or, you had a long night the night before, then it could be because of septum changes. And what I mean by that is the eyeball has fat around the eyeball in the orbit, and you have this tissue called a septum, and the septum holds the fat back. And as you get older, the collagen of your skin starts to change, right? Our facial skin starts to sag a little bit as we get older. And so for older individuals, unfortunately, the septum becomes loose and the fat pads start to creep forward, and it creates this appearance of just baggy eyes. For that, seeking care from either a well-skilled plastic surgeon, or there are specialists in the eye care field called oculoplastic surgeons who just do surgery on the eyelids. They can do some kind of their own magic to tighten up the area around the eyes so that you can get rid of those under eye bags.
And what about an eye twitch? When one of the eyes just starts uncontrollably twitching on you, what's going on there?
Yeah, really good question, because stress. We know stress affects our bodies in so many different ways, right? Eyelid twitching, the medical term is called an eyelid myokymia. And so this is kind of a twitching that you may feel on your lower eyelid, top eyelid. It's usually kind of off to the side, and it seems to just kind of come and go. It's not like a full like spasm or closure of the eyelid, but it just sort of flutters. It's really annoying. I first experienced this in college, and I went to my eye doctor. I had it for like a few months, went to my eye doctor, and he just told me, dude, you're too much stress, you're drinking too much caffeine, and you're not sleeping enough. And at that time, I remember telling him, like, I don't drink caffeine. At that time, I didn't drink coffee or tea. And I've told him I don't feel stressed. But then I went home and I started journaling and listing out everything I was doing in my life, everything I was trying to control and hold on to, whether it be school, whether it was work, whether it was relationship things, planning for the future, because I was applying to optometry schools at the time. And I realized as I was making this list of every little thing I was trying to manage and do, I was like, oh my God, I really am stressed out. And I just had grown so used to it. So for most cases, if you experience an eyelid twitch, best thing is to reduce your caffeine intake or other stimulants, get better sleep, focus on your sleep habits, and then try some way to decrease your stress. Even if you don't feel like you're stressed out, maybe taking note or trying some new stress relief sort of activities. I personally love yoga as well as meditation, and there's good evidence that certain breathing techniques and things like meditation can reduce stress biomarkers in the body and can have a benefit to eye health as well.
You mentioned sleep there. Extrapolate out, talk about the importance of sleep to maintain eye health.
So this has been a more of an interesting area of eye care. There hasn't been a ton of focus on it until maybe the last several years. So we know that obviously sleep affects the brain in many ways. And again, the eyes are just an extension of the brain. So with better sleep, not only you can have better cognitive ability, and much of the vision that you experience is processed by the brain. Yes, our eyes receive all the light information, but it's all processed by the brain. So you may have better attention. You may be able to recognize things better. You may be able to even have better coordination between the eyes and the brain if you are sleeping better. And you may have less symptoms of irritability, less photophobia. There may be an effect if you're not getting as much sleep. It may affect your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which your pupils of your eye are also regulated by the same system. So that may have an effect on your focusing and clarity of vision. And again, your light sensitivity. The other components that I have seen research on sleep has to do a lot with dry eye. Again, for a lot of us, dry eye has a huge inflammatory component. And so if you are not getting very good sleep, then you may not be getting the necessary like healing capacity that you get when you sleep. That is basically the body's cleaning up all of the inflammation and all of the built up oxidation stress, the cellular stress that's building up in all your cells. So there's some benefit to that. And they find that people who have sleep disturbances or sleep diseases, they have a much higher risk of developing dry eye disease and more severe forms of it. Some people even may sleep with their eyes open, cracked a little bit. And so for people who do have more red, irritated eyes first thing in the morning, then there may be a suspicion that perhaps they sleep with their eyes cracked open. We call that nocturnal lag ophthalmos. And I've talked to some sleep study specialists and asked them, like, how often do you see people sleep with their eyes open? He's like, almost everybody. Like, almost everybody that goes in for a sleep study. Again, this is all like anecdotal. I haven't seen research on it, but I used to work in a clinic that was next door to a sleep center. So I would ask the doctor there, and he would say that almost everybody, at least at some point, sleeps with their eyes cracked open just a little bit. So tears evaporate really quickly at nighttime. And there could be some selection bias there because the people going in to have a sleep study, they have other things going on. Obstructive sleep apnea is also connected to that. People who have sleep apnea may have a higher risk of developing a floppy eyelid syndrome, where the eyelids are really loose and they can close 100% of the way. Or they may evert while they're sleeping. They may actually turn inside out while they're sleeping and be exposed. So there's a lot that goes on with that, but we know that sleep is good for the whole body, good for the brain, and now there's some research showing it's really good for the eyes too.
Talk about eye floaters, what those are, how common they are, what changes are happening in the body when we get those.
Yeah, so floaters is a common thing that people experience, and I get almost, most of my patients that come into the eye clinic, I will see some level of floaters inside the eye, especially as they're getting older. Floaters basically are a change to the gel inside of the eye. There's two fluids inside the eye. One I mentioned earlier called the aqueous humor. That's in the front part of the eye. It's kind of like the blood of the eye, except it's clear. In the back part of the eye, there's a gel called the vitreous humor, and it more or less holds the shape of the eye. That gel is mostly water, but it has a little bit of type 2 collagen in it. And that type 2 collagen, as you get older, it starts to degrade. Again, like your skin on your face starts to sag, this gel starts to degrade as well. And the gel, whatever's left of the collagen, these proteins kind of clump together. And they sit inside of what's left and they drift back and forth. And if you're in a really bright lit room, like for those of you who are watching the video feed from like YouTube or something, like the sun is now hitting the side of my window. So it's like suddenly the room seems super bright. But when you're in a bright room, or if it's like a snowy, if you live in a place with a lot of snow, or if you're looking at a bright background on a computer screen, you may see these little black hairs or cobwebs or little spots drift around back and forth. So that's actually those collagen clumps stuck inside the gel inside your eye, and the light is casting a shadow that hits that collagen, that protein in it. You're seeing the shadow scatter across the back of your eye. So that generally is what floaters are. And since it does have a relationship to aging, we basically see about a 10% increased risk of having these floaters per year of life. So if you're at age 50, you have a 50% chance of probably having these floaters. 80, there's about an 80% chance. There is a moment in around middle age to maybe 60 some years old where the gel often fully peels away from the back of the eye, because this gel is in touch with the retina in the back of the eye. And as the gel starts to separate, it can tug either on the retina or it detaches from the optic nerve in the back of the eye. And then people come in, they're like, I'm seeing sudden, huge amount of floaters. I see this large floater in my vision now, this huge black spot drifting around. And that's usually when this vitreous cortex, or this outer layer of the gel, peels away from the retina. And 95% of the time when that happens, that's all it is. The gel peeled away. But there is a risk that when it peels away, it can tug on the retina, and it can either create a tear in the retina or a hole. And if that happens, the fluid that's inside that space of the vitreous humor can seep behind the retinal tissue and lift the retina tissue off the back of the eye and create what's called a retinal detachment, which is an ocular emergency because a retinal detachment can cause blindness and permanent vision loss. So for anybody who's having sudden, little small floaters is not a huge deal. That's pretty normal. But if you have a sudden change in floaters, if you see flashes of light, because as the gel peels from the back of the eye, it can kind of mechanically stimulate the retina and create like this symptom of a flash of light. Or if you have any loss of vision, then definitely do not hesitate. Call your doctor, make an appointment right away. It's kind of a sad joke in the eye care industry, but we always get someone who calls on a Friday afternoon at like 4:00, right before we're about to close. And they're like, hey, I got to be seen right away. My vision's going bad. When did this start? Oh, like 2-3 weeks ago. It's like, when you're having these symptoms, do not let it go. Just give us a call. We'll make an appointment. We'll get you seen right away. The sooner we catch it and get you sent over to surgery, if that happens to be the case, the better chance of you not having any permanent vision loss or damage. So that's kind of my tip for everybody. If you're seeing these changes, do not sit on them. Get seen just so you can get things checked out, at least for the peace of mind.
And in that case where the gel is actually peeling away from the back of the eye, what will you do with the patient?
So if the gel is fully peeled away from the back of the eye, assuming that nothing has torn, there's no holes, there's no detachment, usually that's all that needs to be done. It's like, hey, it's fully detached, awesome, no real risk. There is a small risk that it could still develop within 4 to 6 weeks after the initial experience. So we'll do some testing to make sure that there's no swelling or fluid development within those 4 to 6 weeks. But after that, there's really not much we do. We just say, hey, you've got some severe floaters. Most people neuroadapt or get used to seeing the floating spots. And that takes the research shows about 6 months. It'll take about 6 months to neuroadapt. You just get used to it. Yep, the floaters are fine. They're not a concern. They're just there. However, there are some surgical procedures to remove floaters. We have one called laser vitreolysis, which doesn't 100% get rid of floaters, but they use a YAG laser to zap. It's like playing Asteroids, the old video game from the 70s, where they zap away the floaters with this little laser. There is a more invasive procedure where your retina specialist has to go in and drain the fluid of the eye and replace it with a substitute. That will get rid of all the floaters, but it carries a higher risk because you're going into the OR, you're cutting open the eye. The procedure risks I haven't seen updated studies, but a few years ago I was reading into it, is around 2% risk of a bleeding of the eye or having a retinal detachment. So it doesn't go without risk. And if you haven't had cataract surgery, having this type of floater removal, it's called a vitrectomy. Having a vitrectomy will induce cataracts because you're removing the gel, and the gel also has some supportive benefit of providing antioxidants to the back of the lens. So those are some risk factors, and why most surgeons, most eye doctors don't recommend surgery to remove the floaters. There is a supplement that came out a few years ago that has some research to support that the supplement may be able to improve this presence of floaters. And I did a video on this, the only thing, and I know I'm actually friends with one of the researchers. The only thing is that there is some conflict of interest in that research. If you look into it, they happen to have, that there's some patent or they own stock in the company that also manufactures the supplement. So, it doesn't mean that the study or science is invalid, but it does. I think the eye care industry still raises an eyebrow at it, and we would like more independent research before I think the other doctors and clinicians will start to recommend it or accept that research more.
Throughout our conversation, cataracts have come up a couple times. Talk about what those are and what can be done to prevent or reverse them.
Good question, because cataracts are really common, right? Cataracts, to understand it, inside of the eye, there's a lens. And this lens you're born with, it's clear, it's flexible when you're a kid. It's really thin when you're young. And as you get older, this lens actually thickens. It actually grows one extra layer thick basically every year of your life. It's kind of like looking at the rings on a tree. If you ever look up images of it, you can see individual rings in the lens. As the lens gets thicker throughout life, starting in your mid years of 45 to 55, this lens gets so thick that it becomes difficult to flex. It's no longer easily flexible. And so when you're a kid, you can focus from far away, and then you can look at the tip of your nose almost, because this lens inside is so flexible. You can adjust it in so many ways. But then once you're in your 45, 50 years, it's really tough to flex that lens anymore because it's so thick and rigid. And so we call that having presbyopia. But that's why people need reading glasses and bifocals in their midlife. As you continue to age, though, and you start getting into your 60s, 70s, and above, the same lens starts to oxidize. It starts to become cloudy and can turn kind of a white or a yellowish color. And it kind of it's like looking at a marble almost. But because it clouds over, you can't see out of it. The world around you gradually becomes more fuzzy. The quality of your vision decreases. So your ability to detect contrast, difference between whites and darks, becomes harder. Kind of the classic example is I'll have an old man come in, and I could probably guess that he has cataracts because not only his age, but I look at his socks and he'll have one black sock on and one dark blue sock on. He probably can't tell the difference because there's just too clouding of a lens. And so worldwide, cataracts is one of the leading causes of blindness, especially in underdeveloped countries where they don't have access to cataract surgery. But thankfully, in a lot of developed countries like here in the United States, cataract surgery is one of the most successful surgeries available. It's incredibly fast and efficient and accurate. Basically, it takes longer for them to get you ready for the cataract surgery than it is to perform the procedure. But what they do is they shatter the lens inside the eye using ultrasound. And then they suck it up with a small vacuum. And then in its place, they take a plastic lens that we can determine what power of lens needs to be inserted inside the eye based on your need for glasses. And then they can put that new power inside of the lens that they implant. And then fingers crossed, you may not need to rely on prescription glasses afterward. It depends a little bit on everybody's individual needs in their eye, but also what type of technology may work the best for them. Because we also have different lens designs for the implants, including multifocal implants and a couple others. So pretty cool.
On a preventative layer, though, anything people can do, or it's just part of aging?
So there are, again, there are studies that have looked into this. We do know that sunlight exposure is weakly associated with cataract development. There are different forms of cataracts. There's one called a cortical cataract that does have a higher association with UV light exposure. So we do recommend still UV light protection, protecting the eyes. We know that antioxidants in the diet are really good. Again, vitamin C, very potent, and you want to make sure you're not deficient in things like vitamin C, right? No scurvy. We know that people who smoke, people who drink more often, they also have a higher risk factor for developing cataracts. People who take steroids, whether it be topical eye drop steroids or oral steroids for long periods of time, they are also at higher risk of developing cataracts. Those are probably the biggest ones. Otherwise, it's kind of like getting gray hair. Eventually, everybody will slowly start to develop a cataract if you live long enough. But that being said, I have had maybe 2 or 3 patients in my career who were like over 100 years old. They still had cataracts inside their eye. They haven't had cataract surgery, and they still saw relatively well. They were able to see like 20/25, right? Assuming everything else was still functioning with their brain normally, they were still cognitively there, they would still pass a driver's test for the visual requirements for a driver's test. So not everybody will require cataract surgery, but the vast majority of people will probably benefit from cataract surgery at some point in their life.
We've covered a ton of different conditions throughout our chat here. Any other super common ones or ones that are really important we should cover?
I think just for anybody who's, diabetes is actually a really significant issue. A lot of people struggle with it. The numbers of diabetes are certainly been rising here in the US and other parts of the world. Diabetes affects the eyes significantly. Not only does diabetes increase the risk for things like cataracts, but diabetes affects the blood vessels throughout your body. And the retina in the back of the eye is one of the most highly vascular organs in their body too, next to the kidneys and the brain. And so that's why when somebody is diabetic, they should be recommended to see an eye doctor at least once a year so that they can have their eyes checked, because while your doctor, like your family doctor and endocrinologist, they can do blood samples and see how glycated or how much glucose is in your blood, they really can't see end organ damage, or unless you have like diabetic foot ulcers or you have some sort of neuropathy. But we can look inside the eye and we can actively tell if you're bleeding inside of the eye. And that can obviously cause deterioration in vision, but it helps us communicate to whoever's managing diabetes if it's being well controlled or not, or how the body's organs are responding to medication or treatment. And so I think it's just really important for anybody who is diabetic or you have a diabetic member in your family to make sure they are seeing an eye doctor on a regular basis. And to really, take dietary and lifestyle changes seriously. We continue to see research that if you're able to lose weight, stay more active, be more conscious about what you're eating, especially heart-related things, because if you're diabetic, your risk of high blood pressure, cholesterol, vascular changes to your heart and your brain, eyes and brain, definitely are all increased. And so if you catch it early enough and you're aggressive about managing it, making those lifestyle changes, we can see people go into remission of diabetes now, especially if it's type 2, obviously. But definitely diabetes can affect the eye pretty significantly. So we can always dive deeper into that if you'd like, or if people want, they can also consult some of the things I've published over on YouTube on understanding how diabetes affects the eye.
As you talk about that, I'm curious, how early can you detect diabetes in the eye? Because one of the challenges with type 2 diabetes is that it can take up to 20 years to fully manifest in the body. And there there actually is metabolic changes, insulin resistance that happen in the background over that period of time, causing all kinds of damage. So if somebody like you early on can see those changes in the vessels of the eye, that would be huge for a lot of these people that aren't going to catch it.
You're right. unfortunately, still the body has done a really amazing job evolving and knowing, hey, we need to protect these organs as much as possible until it's just we can't do it anymore. So people are often, even after they've been diagnosed with diabetes, it depends on how severe their diabetes are or how long it's probably been going on even before diagnosis. But it often is some time before we start noticing bleeding changes inside the eye. At that same time, though, I've been the doctor to more or less diagnose diabetes, or at least I diagnose hemorrhaging, and I send a letter to the family doctor and I order blood work saying like, bleeding in the retina is consistent with diabetic retinopathy. Check for these, I submitted the blood work, check for this, manage. And it's always great getting letters, even the family doctor saying, thank you for catching this. These are often patients who don't see the family doctor on a regular basis. They just come in to get the glasses and then I find this. We do see, because we do have access now, not every eye clinic has this, but there are electrodiagnostic testing. So we have what's called electroretinograms. In our clinic, where I practice here in Virginia, has one. Where I used to work in Minnesota has one. But these can also detect function of the retina cells. Even though your vision may be 20/20, we can detect the electrical signals that are going between the retina and the brain. And for people with diabetes, if there's not enough blood flow, not enough nutrients that are getting to the retina, we can see dysfunction in those electrical signals. And so as people get better control of their blood glucose and they have better metabolism, we can see improvements in that electrodiagnostic testing. I think the industry isn't quite there at using electrodiagnostics as a sensitive tool for diabetes specifically, but it is something that some clinics can have access to and utilize. But largely, most of the time, by the time we see diabetic retinopathy changes in the eye, it's already been going on for, like you said, a decade or so. It does depend on how extreme it is. And it's unfortunate because it affects so many people, right? I think the current statistics in the US is like 11% of the population truly has type 2 diabetes, but then like 40% of us have pre-diabetes and like 60% of the population or more is insulin sensitive. Insulin insensitive. So there's, the statistics are kind of staggering. And thankfully there's great resources like what you're putting together to try and reach people and give people at least a beacon of hope of like what they can do and getting information about how to take better care of their life. So thank you.
Well, thank you for what you do. Before we wrap up here, Joey, one final question. Coming full circle on the whole conversation, because early on we talked about the importance of cleaning the eyes. So what I'd like to go through with you is a typical day of eye hygiene. So before bed, in the morning, take me through a full day of what you're doing with what you know to take care of your eyes.
Yeah, thanks for asking this. My routine has definitely evolved over time. I'll tell you, when I first went to optometry school, I didn't do a darn thing other than just I wake up in the morning, I put in my contact lenses, and then at the end of the day, I take them out and I go back to glasses, I fall asleep. That was like all I did. As I started going through school and I started learning about the cleaning of the eyelids and doing what are called warm compresses, I started doing those a little bit more often. And then I got even more aggressive as my own dry eye symptoms and things started, and my understanding of eyelid hygiene and dry eye got better. So right now, my kind of eye health routine, when I wake up in the morning, I am usually, I immediately put on my glasses, head to the bathroom, do my business there. And in that process, if my eyelids are crusty or for some reason they just don't feel, good, like if you get sleep in your eyes, right? Then I will clean my eyelids with some form of an eyelid cleanser. And usually I have eyelid cleaning wipes. There's several different brands out there. I'm a medical advisor for one of them. So I won't name brands or anything like that because there's some conflict of interest. So I'll just stay out of it. But there's many different brands and you can always consult a doctor near you. So I clean my eyelids, I'll put contact lenses in, and I'll be honest, right now I'm looking at maybe getting out of contacts. I might look into having refractive surgery, so maybe I'll get away from the contacts. And then some days, especially if it's winter time and my eyes are more irritated, I will occasionally do a warm compress in the morning. Warm compress is beneficial for people who have meibomian gland dysfunction or dry eye. So it can have a benefit there for symptoms as well as a therapeutic benefit. So I will occasionally do that for about 5 to 10 minutes in the morning. But usually throughout the day, I'm doing great unless I need to put an eye drop in because my contacts are dry. In the evenings, I take out my contact lenses if maybe an hour or two before bed. I will do either another cleaning of my eyelids if they feel gross, but usually I do a warm compress almost every day in the evening. I have different styles I've tested out over the time. There's some that you put in the microwave for 20, 30 seconds. And then you do it for 5-10 minutes. There's other ones that you have like an activator button and that it's kind of like those warming pads you've had if you're going hunting or something like that. They click and then they activate. There's some air activated ones now. I actually tested one of those out the other day. Those are great for people who don't have a microwave. And then there's even some USB ones. I have some of those too. I'll test those out. But I'll do the warm compress for some time. And that's a great way for, again, just getting more blood flow to the eyelids. It helps with the meibomian glands. It melts the thickened oils. And so I'll do that. I guess the other component of my eyelid, not just cleaning the eyelids, but my eyelid health regime or routine is I take supplements of like lutein, zeaxanthin every day. I take some omega-3 supplements, but I try to get that mostly from my diet. And then I will take some other various supplements like curcumin and things like that have some benefit for the eye too.
All right, Joey, we're going to end it here. Really appreciate this. Really appreciate you. We're going to link up your YouTube channel, your website, your social media, everything in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
They were all on insulin, and within a month, all three of them were off of all their insulin. And they'd been on the insulin for like 20 years, right? So 20 years, they got off in a month. So calories are a distraction.